Morning, Roberta.
Oh, good morning. Mazel tov, mazel tov.
Thank you. My son and daughter-in-law had a baby boy on Thursday. So thank you. Shall only have simchas. Okay.
Yeah, Mazel Tov.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So here's what is Passover. In the books, it's on page 210. Eighth-day festival of Passover is celebrated in the early spring, from the 15th to the 22nd of the Hebrew month of Nisan. It commemorates the emancipation of the Israelites from slavery in ancient Egypt. And by following the rituals, good morning, of Passover, we have the ability to relive and experience the true freedom that our ancestors gained. Here, the story in a nutshell, just the narrative, screenplay. After many decades of slavery to the Egyptian pharaohs, or actually centuries, during which time the Israelites were subjected to backbreaking labor and unbearable horrors, God saw the people's distress and sent Moses to Pharaoh with a message: Send forth my people so that they may serve me. But despite numerous warnings, Pharaoh refused to heed God's command. God then sent upon Egypt 10 devastating plagues, afflicting them and destroying everything from their livestock and to their crops. Let me just check, make sure no one's trying to get in. Okay. At the stroke of midnight of 15th of Nisan, which is the day of Passover, that we're in the month of Nisan now, in the year 2448 from creation, which was 1313 before the Common Era, God visited the last of the 10 plagues on the Egyptians, killing all their firstborn. That would have been, it was about 10 months, 10 to 12 months, a little bit of debate of how long it took from the beginning of the plagues until the final morning, Janus. While doing so, God spared the children of Israel, passing over their homes, which is how we get the name Passover, hence the name of the holiday. Pharaoh's resistance was broken, and he virtually chased his former slaves out of the land. The Israelites left in such a hurry. Good morning. In fact, that the bread they baked as provisions for the way did not have time to rise. 600,000 adult males, plus many more women and children, left Egypt on that night and began the trek to Mount Sinai and their birth as God's chosen people. Next page. Second here. Hello. Okay. Passover is divided into two parts. At the bottom of the page on 210. First 2 days and last 2 days, the latter commemorating the splitting of the Red Sea, are full-fledged holidays. Holiday candles are lit at night. Kiddush and sumptuous holiday meals are enjoyed on both sets of nights and days. We don't go to work, drive, ride, switch on or off electric devices. We're permitted to cook and to carry outdoors except on Shabbat. The middle 4 days are called Chol HaMoed, semi-festive intermediate days, when most forms of work are permitted. To commemorate the unleavened bread that the Israelites ate when they left Egypt, we don't eat or even retain in our possession any chametz, which is leavened products, from midday of the day before Passover until the conclusion of the holiday. That would be next Wednesday. And chametz means leavened grain, any food or drink that contains even a trace of wheat, barley, rye, oats, spelt, or the derivatives, and which wasn't guarded from leavening or fermentation. This includes bread, cake, cookies, cereal, pasta, and most alcoholic beverages. However, moreover, almost any processed food or drink can be assumed to be chametz unless certified otherwise. Ridding our homes of chametz is an intensive process. It involves a full-out spring cleaning, search and destroy mission during the weeks before Passover, and it culminates with a ceremonial search for chametz on the night before Passover, and then a chametz burning ceremony on the morning before the holiday, which will be this coming Wednesday, a week from this Wednesday morning, which we'll have over here. Chametz that cannot be disposed of can be sold to a non-Jew, someone who doesn't have the restrictions of Passover, someone who's not Jewish, for the duration of the holiday. Instead of chametz, we eat matzah, flat unleavened bread. It is a mitzvah to partake of matzah on the 2 Seder nights, and if you don't have matzah, we'll give it to you. And during the rest of the holiday, except Shabbat, it is optional. The highlight of Passover is the Seder observed in each of the first 2 nights of the holiday. Say there's a 15-step, family-oriented tradition and a ritual-packed feast. Okay. Today, we're going to focus on the Seder. Oh, 1 second. Someone said something in the chat. Why midnight versus the start of the Jewish day? You mean why the firstborn was midnight?
Yeah,
Is that
why
what?
the plagues were starting at the start of the day based on this non-Jewish
We don't, no,
day.
it's not considered the start of the day. That was when it would be um, when the God forecasted, told Moses to forecast when it would be. So first of all, that was something to say because in those days you didn't have atomic clocks. The idea of God saying, I can know exactly when this is. And if you want to make your calculations, you can try to track this with me. And the main thing was that this would be, he wanted them to go out um, at dawn to be able to leave. So the start of the process of releasing the grip of the Egyptians on them started at night, in a few hours in advance of the dawn, so that the Jews would leave already by dawn.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay,
but the time shows the midnight is
cool.
approximately.
Not approximately. It's not approximately. It's God's exact. Although,
No, that's exactly.
but
The
but but
midnight, what we think of midnight.
it's midway through the dark. Right. The halachic midnight is from nightfall to
Sunrise.
to dawn. Yeah. All right. So now we're going to be talking about is something with the Seder. We're going to be focusing to a certain extent on the charoset, if you know what that is. Charoset is a mixture. Different communities do it differently. There's apples, there'll be nuts, there could be various things. In it, it is meant to symbolize the mortar of that, because the slavery of the Jews had this the need to make bricks and build buildings for Pharaoh, which right there, before we go further, just to say it sounds like, and it can sound like that this was really just a terrible time of forced labor, unpaid labor. It was not that. There was labor, but the idea was that this was a calculated attempt, and it's clear from the scripture and certainly from our history, it was a calculated attempt to destroy a people, destroy us, destroy our spirit. The Jews had grown exponentially, and they wanted to destroy these odd people who believed in invisible gods and stuff like that, or an invisible God.
The growth of the Jews, probably in your case, you should be saying Hebrews, right?
The Hebrews, yes.
Yes, was due to the birth rate or due to other people joining Hebrews?
Well, it's our tradition is that it was a very high birth rate.
High birth rate.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Bravo.
No, like multiple. They have multiples. They have many multiples.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Now, the to look at the text of what we're pursuing today, I think it's important to understand that in general, the way we see life, there's a paradoxical angle to it. Through mystical eyes, Jewish eyes, Torah eyes, say life is designed to have challenges, which doesn't sound great. But at the same time, I say that life is a gift of God's. It's given in love. And the way for us to be able to zero in on our best selves and to achieve is through overcoming challenges, facing, embracing, and overcoming challenges. I'm not hiding from that. The Pesach, the Seder itself also has certain, it seems like paradoxes. It's contradictions. Is this about the suffering? Because we have bitter herbs, eating matzah, which is it's called the bread of poverty, a bread of suffering, bread of affliction, as we translate it. And at the same time, it's a victory meal, saying we made it out, and we're supposed to see ourselves as royalty. And we lean when we drink the cups and eat the matzah because that's the way it was of royalty in ancient times. So, is it a wallowing in the pain of our ancestors, or really the pain of today, because we don't see it as something that happened? There's the consistent Egypt idea, the struggles we go through now, and we're sitting by the Seder. We don't want to just think about what was; we want to think about what is. Both in the fact that there are struggles, and both in the fact that God is there to help us. So it's it's easier, psycho-spiritually, emotionally, to focus on one thing at a time, zeroing on the pain, and celebrate the victories. They seem interconnected in the Seder. And it can be a little confusing. Is this a time when we're royalty, or we're talking about the time when we're slaves and we're being beaten, and we're thinking about it in today, where if we're sitting by the Seder and thinking about what's going on with anti-Semitism and Jew hatred and whatever it is, that fits for the Seder. But also, we're supposed to be saying, but we're not alone, and God has helped us through this before. So a primary point of focus will be on the charoset, because the charoset, on the one hand, if any of you have eaten it, it tends to be sweet. When you make it, that's what it's apples, dates, and at the same time, it symbolizes mortar. It symbolizes the crushing slavery in a way, in its core, even more than the horseradish and the maror. That's not your natural look at it, because it's sitting there on the Seder plate. It tastes fine. You don't the bitterness of the horseradish kind of doesn't let you get away from the idea that there was bitterness that we're talking about here. But the charoset's good. You could have it on a regular day also. I'm not looking to have maror on a Sunday morning, but charoset with on a bagel or something, it could work. So this is not just about the charoset. It's really about where the lessons of the Seder, but we're going to be zeroing in to a great extent on the charoset. So let's. You're good. Actually, by the book, you can have it can have any fruit. In certain communities, traditions like what we do is only ones that we peel, but that's like layers of. That's a little crazy out there. No, yes, you can have any fruits. They're all kosher. Okay. So I'm going to share here. And let's. Yeah, sure.
So once you told us that the Jewish nation is going to be a small nation, time to time we're going to get three. So since
I said it's in the Isaiah, we are called a small nation. The fact is we get trimmed from time to time. I hate to say it that way. Yeah.
So I'm not sure everything is God hand.
Yeah.
So since we're starting to multiply in Egypt out of control, was it a God hand for Egyptians?
Out of control. It was a few million people. That's not control.
That's sizable population.
I can't speak for God here. It sounds like this was certainly God had told Abraham and Sarah that their descendants would be enslaved, but that wasn't about culling the herd. That was about the suffering of history, which is part and parcel of who we are. So, but I'm not on God's advisory committee, so I can't tell you exactly what was. Okay. So this is from someone named Liz Rubin, who I actually have never heard before this lesson. She is a blogger, and it's called. So she is Kosher Like Me is her website, and she has this post of what's your charoset story. So here she writes something that maybe we can identify with. She writes, "It's desperate for something to eat as the Passover Seder progression delays the dinner." I'm sure I can relate to that, waiting for the dinner. "We welcome the moment when we are free to pile charoset on matzah." Ironic, isn't it, that while charoset represents the mortar used to make bricks when we were slaves in Egypt, it is somehow the tastiest symbol at the Passover Seder. So there is a certain paradox that this Liz Reuven, who I don't know if she's a theologian, but it's something that it strikes you. Now she mentions putting charoset directly on the matzah. I don't know if ever you do that. We're going to talk about that, the traditions of whether we do that or not also. But the main thing is there's a certain paradox there, charoset and matzah. And here, there's a question for discussion. Why is there such a craze and quest for sweetness you see the raisins there, in charoset, when it's something that's associated with suffering? It really seems counterintuitive. So, let's take this a little further. Text 2. So we're gonna be looking at the charoset, but we're also going to see how it is, what charoset means, but also how it interplays with the other items of the seder on the seder plate. Text 2. This is from one of the foundational books of Jewish law in the 12 and 1300s, and he quotes a rabbi from 400 years before him, one of the greats of Babylonia, Rabbi Amram, and he wrote that one should recite the Hamotzi blessing before we eat bread or matzah. And he's giving his directions there for how Rabbi Amram wrote like the first thing that we call like a prayer book. He put everything together, and with not only with liturgy but guidance of what to do. So he writes that when you're sitting at the seder, we recite the blessing over bread because it's matzah, is bread. Then we dip matzah in charoset and we eat it. Take matzah and dip it in charoset. Maimonides also encoded this rule. But he writes, this Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher says, I don't understand the reason for this dipping. Where does it say? The Talmud doesn't tell us to do that. Why are we dipping matzah into charoset? And as a matter of fact, he quotes Rabbi Abraham, son of Natan, who authored the book called the Manhig, asked, if matzah represents liberation and charoset represents the mortar, how can they be combined? Matzah represents what happened, and we'll see it soon. On the way out, God says that you're baking matzah, and there'll be a revelation of godliness. It's part of your freedom. That's what you had on your way out. So it reminds us of the freedom. Why are we going to pile on something that represents the slavery? Now let's look at three different elements here of the Seder plate. One is matzah, which represents liberation. Maror, which is there, we use also romaine lettuce, but there's the maror part of it, the bitter part of it, is primarily the horseradish, which represents suffering, and charoset, which represents suffering. So if we look at text 3a, we say, why do we eat bitter herbs, which is maror? Because the Egyptians embittered the lives of our ancestors in Egypt. So that we have this idea of maror. So maror is bitterness, matzah is liberation. The charoset, it's not bitter, but there's a representation. But we don't know from the looking at it itself. It doesn't shout suffering. But if you look at its core, the Torah tells us, Scripture tells us that when Moses came to Pharaoh and he said, "Let my people go," Pharaoh said to his advisors, "Tighten the screws on them, make them suffer. If they're suffering, they'll lose their dreams of freedom." He was trying to suffocate the Jewish soul. So he said, first of all, you have to make bricks. We used to give you mortar for bricks. you're going to have to go find your own straw, make your own mortar, which compounded the work. But then there's something even more horrible that, and we'll read it inside. It's even hard to see the words of the cruelty of what he said. Let's look at 3b. And because after all this, Moses complains to God, what are you doing? Why'd you send me here and all I did, we didn't get them out. I just increased their suffering. What was the suffering he was talking about? Moses famously complained to God, why have you harmed this nation? Our sages explain in the Agada, in Jewish tradition, history, that this was a reference to the mortar. Why? For when the Jewish people ran short of mortar to make bricks, the Egyptians ground Jewish babies into powder and used them as filler for the mortar. That's stuff of ISIS. I mean, this is crazy stuff. Think about it. When you look at the Haroset, it's apples. There's nothing unpleasant, but it's meant to represent something very unpleasant. So the question is, first of all, it's kind of funny that you choose something sweet to represent something so horrible. But before we get to that, the very idea is that the Charoset itself represents the suffering even more than the Morah does. Yes.
Okay, I'm looking at this and I'm asking myself, were the various components of the meal basically enumerated during the post-temple era? Because if so,
Post-temple era or temple era?
in other words, after the destruction of the second temple.
These are all from before.
Okay, the reason I'm asking, of course, is because of the Herosis, which might have been something that some rabbi's wife came up with.
Now, this is all basic. It may have been from a rabbi's wife, but the point is, this is all temple era and Talmudic source.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm sorry. No, it's the general. We have the Haroset is made different in different communities, but it's also basically in the same. Everybody has apples, nuts. Okay. Now, so why do we eat matzah? We said before there's the liberation to hear it, but why we see it that way? Because matzah is also it's a bread of poverty, it's a bread of affliction. But there's a paradox because our ancestors, we say this in the Haggadah. Our ancestors had no time to let their dough rise before the King of all kings, the Holy One, blessed be, revealed himself to them and redeemed them. So it reminds us of that. So the truth is, the whole Seder and many components of the Seder also have this paradox. Is it suffering or is it blessing? Is it redemption? But we're not talking about all the components here. We're talking about what a specific thing, because even though again it shows up again and again, what is this idea of taking charoset, which is really the most intense symbol of suffering, and putting it together with matzah, which brings to mind our liberation. Now, as we mentioned, that Rabbi Amram and Maimonides both say this is a good practice. Text 4, we're going to. It's right here. The matzah represents the joyous and long-awaited moment the Jews were finally liberated from Egypt. Okay. Text 4. This is actually before I go into this. In all the most editions over centuries until very recently, editions of Maimonides' Code of Law, you'd have Maimonides' words, and there's a gloss in there from someone named Rabbi Avraham ben David, something of a contemporary of his. Was very well respected legalist, scholar, mystic, and he has these little glosses where he will often disagree with Maimonides. His language is very harsh, which as a teenager I used to laugh at. It's like, whoa, some rabbi talk. He's very, very blunt, and it's its own studies. Why would he talk this way? If he was a person we respect, it's just not. It's not. It doesn't. It doesn't behoove him. But just preparing for you, it's a little blunt. He writes on Maimonides when Maimonides mentions that we dip the matzah into charoset. Avraham said, that's the way he begins his gloss, because his name is Avraham ben David. Avraham said, this is nonsense. Once again, Maimonides failed to identify a reason for his ruin, even though Maimonides was basing himself on the great Rabbi Amram from centuries before in Babylonia. But there's no reason there. Just said, do it, and he's following Rabbi Amram. And Rabbi Avraham ben David continues that the truth is that over the last few centuries, many of our teachers of blessed memory believe that the matzah over which we recite the matzah blessing should not be dipped in charoset. And this is the prevailing custom. So he disagrees kind of harshly with Maimonides. And these two Torah giants, they disagree. Do you take the matzah and dip it into charoset? So we were trying to figure out, what does it tell us? What's the paradox of taking the intense suffering with liberation? And we see there's a debate whether we should even do it. So now let's get into more of the heart of where we're going. Okay, so these are Rabbi Avraham and Maimonides. I don't think they exactly look that way, but okay. We're going to get into contrasts. So this is not from a Jewish text at all, but it's the idea of of contrast in the visual arts, the ratio of light and darkness that can create either drama or calm or whatever. So this one says, good photographic lighting entails more than understanding how light works. It also requires an understanding of the emotion that lighting scenarios portray. How the lighting sculpts, forms, or informs the emotional elements of an image helps drive a photograph's narrative. Then light becomes more than a way to illuminate a scene. It becomes the determining factor of the image and how the viewer perceives the people or objects in it. So this works in light. Here we're talking about a contrast of ideas. The Seder there's a design of the Seder. And the Seder is meant to have a contrast of ideas. As a matter of fact, one of the key elements of the Seder, as it's described in the Talmud, is that we begin the Seder talking about our people as being either oppressed or unworthy. We look at the trajectory of history where the Jews were not doing well spiritually and politically, societally. And then the idea is there's an upward arc that God saved them, and we got the Torah and all of that. That's the way the Talmud describes it, that the Haggadah should guide us through an emotional journey where we feel the pain and then come to a sense of the liberation. So before we go further with this, just if you think in the Seder, we talk about a lot of the suffering that went on. And hopefully, if we're thinking about it, not just reading words, we're thinking about the fact we all have things that we deal with. We have our own Egypt stuff. But then we get to a Dayenu towards the end of the narrative part before we get to the meal. And in the Dayenu, it keeps going, saying, this, if God would have only given me this blessing, that would have been enough. But God piled another blessing on it. So imagine we do that in our own minds also and say, start counting our blessings, because we all have them. And when we all have them in a steady way, that's when we take them for granted. One of the reasons when we get up in the morning, Jewish tradition guides us to say, thank you, God, for my vision and my hearing and my mobility and all the things, because you wouldn't notice them. You notice your eyes when they hurt, when they're not working. So first, we all have many blessings. So, but that's where the Haggadah is guiding us from a sense of the problems, the struggles of then and now, and hopefully bringing us to a place when we feel a closeness to God and we feel that we appreciate our blessings. We still need other stuff. We're not done. Life doesn't all of a sudden become perfect at the end of the Seder, but at least we have an appreciation for the fact that we're not alone and we do have blessings. So the contrast of ideas. So if you take a look at text 6, what does Maimonides tell us? He's codifying what the Talmud told us. You begin the Seder by declaring that we're slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and describe all the suffering imposed on us. And then the Haggadah guides us to say that's true, but look, we're not alone, and God helps us. We conclude with the miracles and wonders performed for us and with our liberation, and hopefully we get to a place where we feel not that only that God was there for our ancestors, but a feeling of closeness And we say explicitly in the Seder, say this is what God's promise and God's protection of us is what stood by our ancestors and stands by us today, even when there are still people who want to destroy us and we still have our problems, even if it's not necessarily, it's not only Jew hatred. There are problems in the world. But the the core of being able to withstand and deal with those problems spiritually is to know that we're not alone. And that is where the Seder wants to bring us. So there's this contrast. We start off on the downside and we lift it higher. And to the point that we say in text 7, that in every generation, meaning this generation too, this is from the Talmud. So we're talking about for thousands of years, every year, and actually every day, Jews would look and say, we are required to visualize ourselves exiting Egypt. Why do we have to see ourselves exiting Egypt? Because I don't have to envision myself in the toga in the desert and see myself and say, that's me. I have my own Egypts, and God's there for me. And then I have more Egypts. But the idea that we are not alone, and that God did not only liberate our ancestors, he liberated us with them and continues to liberate us. Okay. So now, back to the question, why do some spread charoset, the matzah symbol of liberation? Because dipping matzah into charoset creates contrast that accentuates the relief of liberation from the dark exile. That part of that practice that Maimonides suggests is, lean into it. There's liberation. But there's also been tremendous pain, the horror of what they did with the babies, with the charoset, but experience them together. Feel the pain so you can appreciate the liberation. And that the rabbi who we quoted earlier, actually this isn't a different rabbi, but at the same time, and it says writes here from the Code of Jewish Law, we might suggest that the purpose of dipping matzah into charoset is to remember that God liberated us from the bondage of mortar, as symbolized by the charoset, and granted us freedom, as symbolized by the matzah. Okay, so that all it kind of answers it that this is about contrast, about paradox, and that's an answer. You can take that, but we're going to delve a little deeper into this and say, sharing a journey, or engaging in a journey, or especially sharing of the pain, and then the happy resolution is beautiful. But imagine if sitting around a table, and we're talking about my pain that I went through, that someone else is going through right now, and then talk about my happy resolution. Meanwhile, they're still in the middle of it. That's could be insensitive, and it may not be such a great, depending on how it's presented, it may not be a great experience for the person who's still in the middle of it. So we'll go into a little bit the idea of going into the pain of what we've gone through in history when we're still in it. We can sit around the Seder and say, wow, unbelievable. Look what went on in Egypt, and God came through for them. But look at it, we still have, as we're sitting at the Seder, probably people running to bomb shelters in Israel. I mean, there's stuff going on. We're not done. So it's a little touchy to do the contrast when it hasn't been totally resolved. Yeah.
What about when you eat matzah with the charosis and the bitter herb together?
So what we do is, what's your question about that? See, the maror, to do it with the maror, you see, that is less intense. Things were not good, the Haroset seems to be from the way it's laid out in Jewish law, really bring us to the height of the pain. So why would you do that with the Haroset, with the matzah? So here, if it's here, we're doing it directly, and we don't do it. I don't know if you do it in your community or in your tradition, but we don't dip the matzah specifically directly into the Maimonides has to do it. We don't do it directly into the charos. So that seems to be a broader spread.
Yeah, I'm just like, what does that symbolize when you put them all together?
When you put them all together is really the only reason we do that is not it's I mean I'm sure there's always symbolism everywhere, but that is the way it's to symbolize that, and it's part of the Haggadah that the great sage Hillel instituted a sandwich, but which also had within it as its primary thing the meat of the Passover offering. So we would call it there, but that's not the mitzvah of matzah, or it's not the directive of it is not the experience the matzah and the maror. It's really about bringing everything together to make the sandwich. Here, Maimonides seems to be making a focus. Take your matzah, put with the charoset. There's something about specifically about this bond. It's not we're not remembering anybody, Hillel, anything. It's about there's something to be said for the power of combining the two. And here, what we're saying is that, and this was the Rebbe's one that was offering, Maimonides was saying that invoking trauma to heighten the sense of redemption is worth the risk. Yes, you're bringing up trauma, and I know I see that Leon was asking a question, so I want to go there in a second. That he was invoking the trauma, so to speak, of the Haroset, but in order to bring a contrast of the beauty and the power of the liberation of the matzah, his partner, who disagreed with him, Rabbi Avram, he said, while we are in exile, we feel more pain more than freedom. So putting the charoset on the matzah will reinforce sadness instead of highlighting joy. So he says it's not a good idea. So it wasn't just a question of Jewish law; it's a question of the psycho-spiritual dynamics. So do we want to combine those two? Let me just see now what. Maybe no, there is no other question. Sorry.
Yeah, I had a question, Rabbi, but it
Yes.
was already answered. I thought that there was duplication with the sandwich and
Okay.
this one extra
Okay.
mixing. Yeah.
I'm glad we brought it up then. Okay, great. So now, text 9. There's something we want to take this a little deeper, even though the idea of the contrast, we can take that, we could talk about it by the Seder and the contrast. Clearly, the rabbis wanted us to to talk about the pain in order to highlight the beauty. But take this to a little bit of a deeper level. Text 9. This is from the great Maharal of Prague, and he lived in the 1500s, and he writes that when Jews exited Egypt, they became recipients of intrinsic godliness and therefore remain free. Jews are inherently free because they are intrinsically holy. Circumstantial factors cannot undo inherent truths. Even when Jews are under circumstantial subjugation, they are inherently free. Okay, so this is he comes up with this philosophical idea. He says the Jews in Egypt, they were almost crushed. And what the rabbis told us that we almost lost it because the oppression was so much. And they lost it spiritually. Freeing us from Egypt was not just freeing us from certain geographical boundaries. The point was to bring us to Mount Sinai. What was the point? The point was that we were going to become Jews. It had been Hebrews who were enslaved, and now they become Jews. What was going to be the difference? There was a gift that God gave us. Rabbi Lo here says, or the Maharal says, which is the power of the Jewish soul which it is not only indestructible, it cannot be enslaved. The bodies, we can be enslaved. We come up with last night, many mothers, fathers, children in Israel had to run to bomb shelters in the middle of the night. That's not called freedom. That's a problem. What the Maharal is saying is that our souls can never be enslaved. We always have the power to psychologically and spiritually maintain our freedom, even when physically there's nothing we can do. Inherently free. That's his language. So the charoset, on the one, it symbolizes, how much worse can it get crushing babies? Yet, because we're in such a bad place, God gave us a gift for history of a freedom of the soul. And that's why it's kind of like the lady asked in the beginning there. It's kind of weird that you have something that symbolizes something so disgusting and crushing and horrible, and you make it sweet. Horseradish makes sense to me. You want to symbolize bitterness? Give me horseradish. You want to symbolize a bitter part of our history? Why are you giving me charoset? Apples, dates, nuts? It's a snack. It's sweet. But there is, from this, God granted us the freedom, not just from Egypt and from that slavery, freedom within the human condition, freedom of our own Jewish identity. And I want to take a look at text 10. Here it says, after the exodus from Egypt, we received our Jewish souls. Jewish souls always remain free no matter what our outside circumstances are. But here, this is from the previous Rebbe. The previous Rebbe suffered a lot under the communists. He was arrested in 1927. He was sentenced to death. And then that was commuted because of international pressure. So he was sentenced to exile. And ultimately, he was kicked out of the country. So on his way out in Leningrad, when he's getting on the train to go to Latvia, which is where he was going to live, he had a public address, and he said a part of what he said was, every nation on earth must know that only our Jewish bodies only were subjected to exile and the control of other countries. You look at Jews, he's basically saying, and we've been beaten, and look at the history of how we've been treated. I want everybody to hear that what you can control is our physical bodies. Our souls, however, were never driven into exile and never subjected to the power of others. We must declare openly for all to know that concerning our religion, Torah, mitzvahs, Jewish customs, we have no overlords. No method of compulsion can be effective against us. We must declare with our powerful, intense Jewish intransigence, chutzpah, backed by the thousands of years of Jewish self-sacrifice. The words of the Psalms, touch not my anointed one and persecute not my prophets. May God grant us the courage not to be swayed by the bodily torture they inflict on us. He's saying this right in the thick of Stalinism, and he's and obviously they're there by the train station too, because they were everywhere, the spies. On the contrary, may we accept it with joy. Every punishment we receive, God forbid, for sustaining a Jewish school, studying the Torah, observing the mitzvahs, must fortify our courage in the sacred work of bolstering Judaism and Soviet Union. We must remember that imprisonment and hard labor are transient. The Torah and mitzvahs are eternal. So with bringing out over here, our bodies can be imprisoned, our essence is always free. What we bring over here is that Morar represents our ancestors' physical slavery, which is true, it was horrible. But the charoset represents what the crushed spirit represents, our ancestors' spiritual slavery. And the charoset tells us that the Egyptians had a hold over the Jewish souls. They almost got us. But it represents to us And it's sweet because they didn't get us. It represents the mortar, which represents the greatest intensity of the horrors and the torture. But it's sweet because it's on the way out. What our ancestors received as a gift from God, and we receive as a gift from our ancestors, is our Jewish soul, which is indestructible and unslavable, so to speak. Text 11 from the same Rabbi Yehuda. The hard labor they imposed on us was bitter, but it was not entirely unbearable. The mortar was a breaking point. Nothing was harsher than the mortar episode. That is why we place a symbol of the mortar on our Seder table. And that's what it represents. Now, the question is, do we mix it with matzah? Maimonides has one opinion, others have another opinion. So Maimonides, it's basically what we're saying, and I'm going to read it soon. By dipping the matzah into charoset, we affirm that even if we're not fully free, we're free in essence. Because even if right now the Jews are under the gun of Jew hatred, and that's true. And in Israel, they're under the gun of missiles from Iran, which is true. So we're not fully free, but we're free in essence. Even Jews in their bomb shelters, even us, when they have some crazy people on the right and on the left to saying horrible things about us openly, we're free in essence. This is what we celebrate on the Seder night. So it's Maimonides, take the matzah and put it into the charoset. The charoset tells you that, yes, it was horrible, but ultimately we're still free. Rabbi Abraham disagrees. He says, if we're not fully free, highlighting partial freedom can backfire and cause Jews to focus on what we're lacking. So he says, don't dip it in the mouth. Do the matzah, but don't confuse the message of the matzah with the maror. If you look at how the Rebbe addressed in text 12, based on the above, we can explain the dispute between Maimonides and Rabbi Avraham about dipping matzah into charoset and the distinction between the Erev of the temple and the Erev of the exile. Because in the Erev of the temple, we did it. In the Erev of the temple, we definitely did the matzah in the charoset. When the temple stood, it was possible to entirely fulfill the commandment to remember being enslaved in Egypt and going free because we were still free. We could remember that you were enslaved. You're talking about the times of the temple when the Jewish Commonwealth, we had our land, we had our Israel. It was under Jewish self-determination. We lived as Jews and we lived in peace with our neighbors. There was freedom. So we could remember what was as we were ourselves enslaved and then granted our freedom. Therefore, all agreed it was appropriate to dip the matzah in charoset to demonstrate that God took us from slavery to freedom because we were in a safe place emotionally, because now we're free. However, today, now that we are in exile, we can't fulfill it in its entirety. We can't fulfill in its entirety the commandment to remember that you were enslaved and liberated because we are no longer free. So that's that they were enslaved. We still have problems. It's not Egypt, it's not slavery, but we still got plenty of problems. Therefore, the question is whether it is possible to fulfill it in part. Can we celebrate being redeemed from the unique intrinsic subjugation in Egypt, since we are still free of intrinsic subjugation, despite being in circumstantial subjugation, because, as we explained above, that our souls are not can be enslaved. Maimonides believed it is possible to fulfill this commandment in part. He therefore rules that we dip matzah into charoset to celebrate that we were liberated from intrinsic mortal subjugation, symbolized by the charoset, though we remain in circumstantial subjugation. Rabbi Abraham disagreed and held that freedom can't be parsed. We are either free or we're not. And accordingly, in a year like this, when we got so much going on, although we tell the story of the Exodus in detail, we can't fulfill it in its entirety the command to remember that you were enslaved and went free while we're back in circumstantial subjugation. Because the fact is, if we talk about, thank God we're free, you say, free of what? We still got problems. So, but to circle back and to give us something important to hang on to here for the Seder and for life, given what we're going through, is text 13. Why do we enjoy charoset, a symbol of our unspeakable suffering? Charoset carries the bitter theme of suffering, but simultaneously reminds us that our Pintalayid means our core Jewish identity always prevails, that it can't be enslaved, specifically as an outgrowth of the Egyptian slavery. And in Jewish law, it says charoset should be thick because it is a testament to the mortar by which our ancestors were subjugated. Thus, we must soften the consistency with the liquid to remember the blood. Use wine. It is appropriate to often soften it with a red liquid such as mead or red wine. It is appropriate to make the charoset of fruits that serve as metaphors for the Jewish people, such as figs, as is written, the fig tree has put forth its green figs, nuts, as is written, I went down to the nut garden, dates, as is written, let me climb up the palm tree. All these refer metaphorically to Jews. Pomegranates, as is written, like a split pomegranate, apples, as is written under the apple tree. When the Jewish women gave birth without pain, well, under the apple tree, out in the fields, and almonds. For God was diligent, and almonds grow quickly, about ending our exile. So there in Jewish law, we say, create this thing, this dish, which symbolizes the depths of the crushing slavery, and we make it sweet and symbolizes the beauty of the Jewish people. It does, because ultimately, while charoset is sweet, because while it is a testament to the Jews' unbearable suffering, it also celebrates the Jewish soul's perseverance. And now we say, with the coming of Mashiach, we'll be able to feel complete freedom and dip our matzah into charoset, even though it's not usually done today. So here's key points. Number one, matzah represents the exodus from Egypt. Charoset represents the harshest form of suffering in Egypt when Jewish babies are crushed and mixed into the water. Number two, in Egypt, Jews were intrinsically subjugated. They almost got us. Egyptians had the power to crush them and own their souls, as indicated by the Charoset. Since the Exodus and the gift of our peoplehood in Sinai, our bodies can be enslaved, but our souls are always free. We can be in circumstantial bondage, but never inherently subjugated. Number three, dipping matzah, a symbol of freedom, into charoset, a symbol of soul-crushing exile, declares that although we are still in exile, we are free concerning anything related to our soul. Four, however, Jewish law determines that we should not dip matzah into charoset while in exile. In other words, we don't, the practice, I think, in most communities is not like Maimonides. Drawing any attention to subjugations of which we are free also draws attention to depression while we still suffer. This can lead to dejection on a night that should celebrate freedom. So we should keep the freedom theme clean, not inherently connected to the crushing suffering. As we draw closer to the era of Mashiach, the freedom of our soul becomes more accentuated, which explains the delicious recipes we make for charoset and the fact that so many people eat it with relish these days. So, go ahead, question.
Question I always ask, when is it when are we not gonna still be in the middle?
I don't know. It's a question for God. That's why we pray. I don't. 6, 7 years ago, I would have thought we were getting close. Right?
Yeah.
I was naive, but right? October 8th showed us a whole world we didn't expect. And you're right. It's hard. It's very unsettling.
I mean, this is the first time that I've heard about Jewish babies.
Yeah, it's hard.
I just.
What?
There are no words.
Yeah.
Just no words.
It's sorry to. We've been through a lot. We've been through a lot, and thank God we're not as what.
Chosen. Why?
Singled out the rest of the
A big price, right? Yeah, but I think that ultimately the lesson of this is that Jews have persevered in in recognizing, first of all, the very miracle of our existence. I mean, there's a why, I get it, but why was God? Why would we still exist? It defies logic. But there's right there's the Zoroastrians are gone. These people, the people who the Phoenicians, where are these people? Where are the Philistines? And somehow everybody we've gone through so much and concerted efforts to destroy us. We're alive for a reason. Um, there's a reason to hope for the suffering to come to an end, right? As when I was a teenager, and I would listen to that I was speaking, and so I was like physically crying about the pain in the world, and looking for Mashiach. What I want the Mashiach, I want the Mashiach. Okay, Judaism wants Mashiach, but I didn't need Mashiach. Wasn't so. I have camp coming. I got things going on in my life. As I got older and I understood more the pain of a little bit, I mean, the pain of just of regular society, I understood, there was feeling that, and he was crying for it. And he asked the same questions as you. So, but he didn't. He was never doubting that there's God with us in our pain. But saying enough, enough. He used to say there's a language ad mosa in Hebrew means until when. He said often. He used to say those words. Enough. How long does this have to go on? Human suffering. We've done our job. Finish.
Maybe we haven't. I mean, maybe the job is to fulfill. Thank God for everything, right? No.
I don't believe in a God who believes in blowing people up. They're blowing yourself up to blow up other people. That's not my God. But it's what? Say it again. Right? And one of the big miracles is that we'll live in harmony with everybody else, even the Muslim Brotherhood. They'll still exist. They'll refine their perspective of Allah. They don't just disappear. Yeah, another question. Yes. Pretty much.
How is the infamous Jewish publishing able to pass around the documents between those two parties that were geographically quite separate? One was in France, one in Spain, or in Egypt.
Initially they came out separately. I don't think actually the original David the writing is not that voluminous. I think he just put it. It was printed. He printed it on his. I don't know how it all went together. Yeah, for sure. No, I'm just saying, but I don't know if it was ever published as its own. Its own book.
The question is logistic. How did writings of Maimonides from Spain and made it all the way to Poland?
I mean, we had also from Egypt making it to Krakow for the Code of Jewish Law.
But not at the same time. It took, these guys were contemporaries.
No, those two were also same contemporaries. The two in the Code of Jewish Law and the Sfarting were also contemporaries.
So how was the logistics made?
I guess it wasn't easy. I don't know. It's a good question. I know it just happened. Yes, Leon.
Rabbi, just one question. If I remember correctly from the mystical, I forget which specific books or of part of the philosophy, that there are 50 gradations of how the soul could be separated from God. And somewhere my understanding is that Jews or Hebrews in Egypt were at the 49, and they
Correct.
almost lost it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, you're
so,
right.
so, so I thought that the 50th was already the intrinsic part, and so, so it was always. So it looks like there is some contradiction that it was always there, but then according to today's lesson, we just got it.
It's not that the 50th is the intrinsic part. It's that at 50, if they had sunk that low, it would have become irredeemable. And they just didn't get there. But one of the reasons we say that there was such a haste to get them out of Egypt was because they were almost there.
I see. So it wasn't the intrinsic; it was something else.
It's
The
not, not,
50th.
no,
Okay.
it's not. Yeah, I know what you're saying. No, it's not that. The 50th would have been in the depths of the impurity, not the intrinsic character of the soul.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Rabbi, you raised one more question.
Yeah. Great week, everyone.